we're gonna start now. Today's session is on the ritual aspects of Rusyn wedding clothing with Izzy Fernando, or Izzy. She's called Izzy, so that's it. Before I introduce her, let's go to the next slide, Izzy.
All right.
There. Okay. So today your hosts are me, Karen Varian. I'm the chair of the CRS Education Committee. And John Kopcha, he's the coordinator for the Delaware Valley chapter of CRS. Today's rules are everyone's muted and can only be unmuted by one of the hosts. We ask that you put all your questions in the Q&A and not in the chat. We will hold all questions until the end, and then the host will ask the questions. And after all those questions are answered, we'll open it up. And at that time, you'll be asked to raise your hand, and then we can unmute you. The presentation will be approximately 30 minutes with up to 30 minutes for the Q&A and discussion. This presentation will be recorded and made available to CRS members. Okay, thank you. Let's go on to the next slide, and I'll introduce you, Izzy. All right. Izzy, for short, graduated from Slippery Rock College, where she studied psychology and international gender studies. She attended the Studium Carpatho-Rusyn summer school in Prussia. She's an accomplished artist specializing in textiles and material culture. A lot of you've probably seen her online. She's on Facebook showing off a lot of the textiles that she's made. She currently lives in Buffalo, New York, but she grew up in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. I'm going to turn it over to Izzy now, and she can say a little bit more about herself, and then she'll start the presentation.
Hi, my name is Izzy. That's pretty much what I do. My ancestral villages are Folvark / Doniani and Obruchny. And that's on my mother's side. On my father's side, I'm Native American and Filipino, so that's why I have my name and look the way I do. But yeah, so today we're going to talk about the ritual aspects of Rusyn wedding clothing as preserved by the Lemko American mock wedding tradition. So before we get into like the steps of the wedding and stuff, I'm going to talk about some of the reasons why folk dress didn't really keep on in America, and we don't really have like many opportunities where you see Rusyn folk dress, and then like also why the Lemko mock wedding was so important in preserving these types of traditions. So yeah, I'll start by getting into a little bit of background. So it was after immigrating to America, many Lemko and Rusyn immigrants in the late 19th and early 20th century stopped wearing traditional clothing of their villages and adopted American forms of dress. This is because it was seen as a status symbol to wear American clothing and to send pictures of one, and to even send pictures of oneself in these new clothes to relatives in the homeland. In fact, the trading in of one's village clothing and for new American clothes was mentioned in these early 20th century immigration songs. So these are songs written by Rusyns in America singing about the process of immigration and experiences in America. So there's one song called Dobry v Americy, and that means good in America. And one of the lines specifically is, in America, you can wear nice clothes. And that's the quote you see there. And like, so that's another, like, it was seen as a status symbol to wear this more fancy town clothing than just Croy. And it was also mentioned in my studium classes by Professor Magocci that like these Americans would come back to the villages to visit, and they'd have their American clothes on and think they were better than the people in the villages and stuff like that because they'd attained these status symbols. Another reason why the clothing and other aspects of Rusyn culture might have not stuck around or been passed down is because of prejudice. American discrimination towards Slavic people and immigrants definitely had a hand in forcefully assimilating people to American culture, like in language, way of dress, etc. Books written by Americans, such as the one that you see here, in the early 20th century, refer to the arrival of new Slavic immigrants as an invasion and painted their culture as alien and even criminal in some cases. The discrimination too was sung about in these immigration songs that I was talking about earlier. There is a song called Podmi Chlopsi Podmi, Dotoya Maritzi, or Let's Go Boys to America. And in the song, the speaker says how America promises freedom, but the experience was disappointing because he's just rolled over by English culture and language and these English Americans, essentially. Yeah, and even in the and then there's another song that is called Mamko, or My Mamko Doma Yav Americi, which is my mom is home and I'm in America. And she also says a lot of that is singing about how it's bad if you don't know the language, how they treat you terribly at work if you speak in a different language or you have an accent and stuff like that. So yeah, clothing especially marks one's appearance as different. So to be able to blend into American social circles, which often meant professional growth for Carpatho-Rusyn Americans and survival, meant forgoing these external aspects of Carpatho-Rusyn culture. So that includes clothing, language. That's why many of us Carpatho-Rusyn Americans don't speak Rusyn, and we go to Studium to learn it. And that's why our ancestors didn't pass it down. For my great grandparents, they said oh, you don't have any use for that. That's not really practical in America. It was all about practicality. Speaking about practicality, that is another reason that folk clothing did not really survive in the US. So in history, Carpatho-Rusyn clothing had a specific purpose in village life. While linen and sheepskin coats might have kept one protected during work in the fields or watching over the herds of cattle and, all that stuff, it does not really work when you're working in a sewing factory, a steel mill, a coal mine, places like that. So materials like linen, wool, all that, it's great for keeping you protected from the elements and also in harmony with nature. So it's it kind of keeps you integrated with your environment. A lot of the conditions in industrialized America were not conducive to this. You had harmful chemicals, you had pollution, you had all this sort of stuff that wearing clothing like that just wouldn't have worked out in that way. Sorry. And then when it comes to other clothing for more special occasions such as weddings and other occasions, like in this picture, you see on the left-hand side that there is a group of people from a wedding party that adapted to the American dress as well, because weddings and stuff like that is where your personal life sort of blends in with the broader society you're in. So it all just kind of stops. So as traditional clothing was exchanged for American fashion and the Carpatho-Rusyn language was exchanged for English, immigrants and their descendants needed an intentional space to express Carpatho-Rusyn culture if it was going to survive. So for Lemko Americans, this intentional space often took the form of the Lemkowski Vesilia, or the Lemko Wedding, which was a play often organized by a church or a social club. And in these special mock weddings, the couple being married, as well as the wedding participants, would have just been members of the community, both first and second generation immigrants usually. And the couple were not obviously really getting married, but instead this was a cultural preservation exercise. It was a very intentional cultural preservation exercise. We have this event and we're going to show it to you, or show it to other people in our community. So there wasn't that pressure to be assimilated. So yeah, and this continued throughout the 20th century. So this is an early 20th century photograph that I got from Carpatho-Rusyn of PA. Thank you, Rich Custer. I know you're in attendance. But it continued throughout the 20th century into the 1960s, and that is where you have Lemkovsky Vasilia, which is the film that was made. So what made the Lemko mock wedding tradition unique is that its preservation of traditional clothing. These pieces of clothing served as part of the wedding ceremony itself, so it's different from when traditional clothing is worn in a folk dance setting or something like that, where the purpose is usually to create aesthetic unity among the dancers and sort of that stuff. This is like the use of clothing in the Lemko wedding is really meant to illustrate the ritual like the ritual purposes of these clothing pieces. So the combination of these clothing items along with the songs and sayings and just sort of like vocal things that go along with the wedding create a context and uniquely preserve an important rite of passage in Lemko village life, even in the American diaspora, which is facing all these sort of pressures to assimilate, as I've gone over. So sadly, not many videos of these Lemko weddings exist. I've found most of what I found have been pictures, and I also found a record at one point. And then but while I was doing research, I came across this video called Lemkovsky Vasilia, which was made in Monroe, New York by the Lemko Association of America, which was a social group that supported Lemko and Rusyn diasporas in America. It was filmed in 1961 in a place called Lemko Park, which was basically just like a giant social club for Rusyn Americans. And Lemko Park contained reconstructions of traditional buildings and houses and things like that. The Lemko wedding film was filmed in the Rusyn language with English subtitles, and the casts were various members of the communities in the region. The cast members consisted of both first and second generation immigrants too, so like you do have that cultural transmission from the generations, which I think is cool. So in the film, the clothing appears to be from central Lemkovina, primarily, specifically in a style from, like the closest I could find was Krempna village in what is Lemkovina. But the film itself claims to recreate traditions from all over Lemkovina, not specifically from one village. The film has survived into the digital age thanks to Walter Maximovich's YouTube channel, and it still serves as an educational documentary, not only of Lemko weddings and villages, but the traditional American Lemko mock wedding play. So what makes this film unique is it not only includes the wedding itself, it includes the steps leading up to the wedding, and from the formation of the marriage agreement here and the procession of the house where the marriage takes place. Through this time frame, like the differences between everyday clothing and the festive clothing for the wedding are shown. So here you see the everyday clothing, and in a little bit you'll see the ceremonial clothing. Just to sort of point out the ritual purpose of this like folk wedding was to, like in the village, was to aid one's transition from one stage of life to another, basically. So from being unmarried to married, which was a big jump, like that's kind of how you were brought into adulthood, essentially, is through your wedding. This required a transformation of all the persons involved in the wedding. So in many of these transformative rituals included clothing, like either removing or putting on a piece of clothing. Okay, so many of the rituals during the wedding ceremony require pieces of one's outfit, as I said. Before the wedding, the bridesmaids, dressed in festive clothing, as you see here, are decorating the groomsmen's hats. The groomsmen are also dressed in festive clothing. The hats gain ceremonial meaning through the decoration and transform the ordinary young men into groomsmen. The couple to be married also exchange kerchiefs or hustke. and this is attached to the bride's apron and the groom's pants pocket. So in the wedding, there's a sort of a procession where the groomsmen and bridesmaids are coming out, and they try to trick the groom into saying like, "Oh, this is your bride," and they're like, "No, that's not my bride," and then they put them with the groomsmen, and then finally the bride comes out and they recognize each other through these hustka or kerchiefs. So yeah, and then before the wedding, similarly, the brides come together and make their wedding wreath headdresses or parta. These the bride makes her own wreath as well, and she also makes the one that her husband is going to wear on his hat during the wedding. This is an emotional moment for the bride, who cries as the wreath is being placed on her head. Like the men, the change in costume represents the ritual change from the young women to bridesmaids and the woman who's about to get married into a bride-to-be. All right. So this ceremony is followed by the presentation of the wedding shirt from the bride to the groom as a symbol of love, which I find very interesting as someone with a psychological background, because love is shown through doing things for each other and making things. And this actually correlates to like some psychological research I read that says that in Eastern Europe and East Central Europe, the primary love language is gift giving and receiving, and as well as acts of service, which is doing things for people, which is different from America and the West, where like a lot of people primarily focus on words of affirmation. So I thought that was a little interesting tidbit. And then after this, the starosta, which is like the best man, but a little bit older and sort of the master of ceremonies for the wedding, gives the groomsmen sticks. These are meant for protective purposes, but also meant to be sort of gateways, as we'll see a little bit later on in the presentation. Throughout the ceremony, the bride's mother and her matron of honor place and remove a kerchief from the bride's head. This is because women's hair had a ritual significance. Women's hair was tied to fertility and the source of all human life, and was often braided in different ways throughout a woman's life and covered for protection after marriage, which is what we see here. So it has been noted by some ethnographers that in ancient times, the young women's braids that were worn before marriage, and like the chevron diamond shape that's created by braiding the hair, may have been related to like fertility goddess worship. So like the hair is a very important part in the wedding, and the sort of like, because it has this much meaning and significance. Another thing that the bride's mother does is she ties a rushnik or ritual cloth to the groom, and that's before he leaves her house and goes to his own. She's blocked from doing this by two of the groomsmen with those sticks. So again, sort of like it's a gateway, but they have these pieces of their outfit that is meant to like symbolize different things. Yeah, so then later on in the ceremony, after they leave the bride's house, they go to the groom's house. And this is where the mother-in-law of the bride, the groom's mother, meets them with various offerings. She's wearing a koja, I think, which is a sheepskin coat to represent wealth. Okay, and then finally, the matron of honor, or sometimes the bride's own mother in different contexts, places the wedding cap or chepets on the head of the bride, who is transformed into a wife through this ritual. Often before this ceremony, but it isn't in this video, there is a stealing of the bride's wedding wreath by the starosta, which becomes symbolic of the braid she once wore in the bride's previous life as a unmarried person. He might ask her if he should take off her wreath or cut off her head, to which she may reply, "Cut off my head," basically. Also not shown here, but often practiced, is the collection of money in the chepets, which is where the popular Rusyn American wedding tradition of the apron dance comes from, where all the guests put $1 in the apron and then dance with the bride. That comes from putting money in the chepets. Yeah, here's a close-up of the chepet ceremony. So these rituals show how important clothing items were to the ritual of marriage in Lemko village culture, as well as how important the use of traditional Lemko clothing was in these mock wedding plays and productions. Lemko clothing in these mock it is also important to note how important the mothers are in these Rusyn wedding traditions, as it is the mother of the bride or the matron of honor who performs most of the transformation rituals, especially in regards to the bride. This is important because other ethnographers of different Slavic regions, such as Russia, have said it's like the bride's father that places the kerchief on her head and stuff like that. But it's unique and important that in our Rusyn traditions, it's the mother who does it. Because the father doing it sort of shows this like male ownership of the bride from the beginning with her dad and to the end with her husband. But the fact that these female figures do it in our Rusyn context signifies that it's a matriarchal tradition, matriarchal rite of passage that is given from older women to younger women. And then finally, wearing traditional clothing during the mock wedding ceremony gives ritual of physical conduit. These speeches and songs of ritual action are made complete through the application of clothing pieces. Carpatho-Rusyn mock weddings still occur in Europe, and I had the pleasure of participating when I was in Studium. I got to play one of the bridesmaids. And while I did that, like it really felt like, because I've worn Croy a lot before in my artwork and in my research and all sorts of stuff like that. But wearing it in that sort of ritual context really felt like I was like giving life to these objects once again, because that's sort of what they're meant to do. They're not meant to sit around and not be worn, and because like that's, the use of clothing is to be worn usually. So yeah, Lemko culture and Carpatho-Rusyn culture in the minority, even where they are officially recognized. Many people do not know the unique aspects of Rusyn clothing, especially in the American diaspora. What Lemko mock weddings serve to do is to preserve the day-to-day practices that form the basis of village life. The Lemko mock wedding was also an outward display of one's culture in a United States where one was pressured to speak English and dress and act like an American in order to survive. Through the mock weddings, the preservation of ritual, dress, and song became a statement of unique cultural identity, and wearing traditional clothing gave a physical and visual reinforcement to this statement, turning objects and words into a ritual, and thus the use of Lemko clothing in the mock wedding kept the traditions and spirit of Lemkovina and Carpathian Rus alive in the American diaspora during the 20th century. Thank you.
Thank you. We don't see any questions here. I'm going to start with a question though.
Okay.
First of all, I just want to mention that Linda Stuffelbein said that it was her Nana in that first wedding picture, the girl on the right. So if you probably knows who else is in that picture, you may want to talk to her. Oh, yeah, and she raised her hand here. So just a minute, I got to find you, Linda. Okay. All right, Linda.
Hello. That is my grandmother in that photograph. I've posted it online. I've shared it with Steve Osifjian on his website. So I don't know where you found it, but I have shared it. It was a photo that my grandmother had. She was born in 1893 here. Family went back to Europe in 1898. She returned in 1910 and stayed forever. She never went back to Europe. She married in 1915. So that photo was taken in Passaic, New Jersey. I'm sure they got married at, today it's the Cathedral of St. Michael's in Passaic. It was St. Michael's Church back then. And I'm guessing it was taken maybe around 1912 or 1913. So she came in November 1910. She married in September 1915. She was not married there. I do not know who she could not remember who the other people were. She was in several weddings. I have other photos and I have her own wedding photo. She could not remember who those other people were. but
Yeah.
100% positive they were parishioners at St. Michael's, and they were most likely from the villages of Uyak or Haitoki.
Hmm. That is wonderful. Thank you for sharing that story with me. Yeah.
We
Oop,
we have a question in chat. It says,
Go ahead and ask it, John.
do you have any resources for patterns for headscarves that I could use with my family moving forward if we don't have any to base things off of? We are not Lemko, but Hutzel.
Mm. Okay, yeah, so the headscarf patterns, there's quite a few you could look for. Like, there's a lot of them were very general designs because they were mass produced in a lot of ways. So like you have like the classic like floral babushka, like that is worn in like you can look up I think any Ukrainian sort of headdress would work for that.
I have one that's a Lemko one, and the
Mm.
scarf has got just little embroidery around. It's
Yeah.
white with little embroidery around it, and then a little embroidery, and I think in the corners.
Yeah, the Lemko and Boyko ones have very interesting embroidery on them, and then Lemkos also have different headdresses for weddings. So there's a headdress called a fatselik, which is like a big puffy headdress that would be worn by like the married women to a wedding. I recently reconstructed one of those. Yeah, it's very interesting.
Somebody asked how they can see the video of the mock wedding.
Oh, I can send it to Karen and she can send it out.
Okay, and what we'll do is when we send out the notice of the that the recording is available, I'll put the link in there. But I think you had it. Go back. Can you go back a few slides? I think you had the title.
Yeah.
You wanted to look that up.
I remember it said Lemko wedding.
There.
Right,
There
Lemko's in the USA, Lemko wedding. So what if on YouTube you could just go to Lemko wedding, maybe?
Yeah, you just would type, yeah, Lemko wedding or something like that, 1964.
Well, my question was, okay, they did this Lemko wedding reenactment in the 30s. People had already been here, some of them, for 20, 25 years, whatever. So how did they know how to make the folk dress? How did they know the pattern to use?
So a lot of people brought folk dresses over, Croy over from the old country. Like my great grandmother, there's a picture of her in Croy from our village of Folvark, but none of our family knows where it went, so it must have not belonged to her. So I think churches and different organizations had these items kind of stockpiled, or they had older people that would tell you how to make it, because this is still like the generation in the 30s, you still would have had people that knew what the dress in the home country would have looked like.
I know I've talked to my relatives that live in Transcarpathia, and a lot of them make the embroidered table runner things.
Oh, awesome. I
And
bought one of those.
well, they say over the years they've developed their own kind of patterns. So the patterns aren't, they aren't what they were 50 years ago exactly, because they developed some of their own creativity.
Yeah.
So I'm sure some of that occurred too. So, okay,
yeah.
Another question, you mentioned bride and groom's homes. Did they marry in a church?
Yes, they did. I'm not the expert on Greek Catholic or Orthodox weddings. I know they do the crown switching. That's about it, because I watched my grandparents' wedding video. I was not raised religious. So I am much more familiar with like the folklore around the wedding than I am the religious wedding ceremony. And here, this image is actually taken in the church, like during the church wedding part. Yeah.
Yeah, and what was I going to say about that? Yes, they go to church. There's like a procession that they do to go to church. So I'm going to ask these, John, and then you can go and do some that.
There's a question in chat.
Yeah.
It says, what did they wear on their feet?
So you would have had a few different options. Like when it's colder, they had leather boots, usually in red or black. They also had woven shoes, which I don't think were really too popularly worn, but those were woven out of like birch bark and stuff like that. Um, yeah, so it probably would have been boots for the wedding because that's a little more, fancier and more expensive. Yeah.
All right, there's another question here. When were mock weddings performed in Lemko, and are they still performed there and in the USA?
Um, I know that there is hopefully a Lemko wedding potentially being planned in the USA. But I haven't seen any in my local area. They do still occur in Europe. I would believe that they still do it. I attended one in Slovakia, so I would think they would do them in Lemkovina as well. So
Yeah, the one you went to in Slovakia, I know is from in the village of Tiki Potok.
yeah,
And
Tikipopov.
they do that in Tiki Potok for the studium participants. They'll also do it at other times if you have a group. So they'll
Yeah,
do that. Um,
it's a tourist. It's a
yeah,
big tourist
it's a
thing.
tourist kind of
Yeah.
thing they do. So as far as doing them in the United States, I'm going to let John address that because he's thinking about getting one together.
Yeah, we're going to be doing it probably in September, and I got some information from Brian McHugh. Thank you. And I've been doing research on my own. Hopefully, I'll be able to use Izzy as a resource also. But it's going to be done in a church, and we have a priest set up already, a real church with a real priest. And the hardest part is going to be putting together the costumes. So we're going to have to start working on that. I already have a wedding dress that we can alter. But
Okay,
now
is
I
there
see,
any,
but now
is there,
now I see we have to do more extensive research on groomsmen.
Yeah.
I've got some things I can send you to.
Okay, it's going to be in the Philadelphia area. I'll send out information as we get closer, and
I
we will record it for posterity.
Let's see. Amy wants to talk to you, Izzy, and if you want, Amy, you want to ask her a question now, raise your hand. Otherwise, I can connect you with her, okay? Okay. Okay, she said, okay. Okay, I got to see my questions here. I noticed on the Lemko festival thing that you have in your slide, one of the performers was a balalaika group called Carpatho-Rusyn. And I guess why I noticed that too is I see, wait till you get to the poster. See the poster there,
Yes.
Balalaika-Rusyn, Russe. And for Minneapolis here, what we've seen is that there was a lot of Russian influence, especially in the Orthodox Church. So they created
Yeah.
balalaika groups. Their folk dress was Russian. It wasn't Carpatho-Rusyn, except I have one photo. I wish I had it here, but where the church participated in something with our Aquatennial Festival, and it was Russian. They had a samovar out there and everything.
Yeah.
But their dress they had on in that one was more folk dress, Carpatho-Rusyn
Yeah.
folk dress. So it didn't, the two things didn't match up.
Totally. No, I like on my family, most of my family is also Orthodox. So like I grew up like people would get me the nesting dolls. People would give me like my mom has this big shawl that has like the St. Petersburg church on it that I still have. Um no, my Baba took Russian lessons through her church, but not Rusyn lessons, which I'm like, that's so interesting. So yeah,
Right.
that definitely happened. And
Okay, there's
Lemko Association, I think, was also quite Russophile for a time. So from what I
that's
read.
why we see that there, I guess. One of the
Yeah.
questions is what distinguish Rusyn vests?
So Rusyn vests, like
Yeah.
the outerwear. So like I mean, they would be differentiated depending on region. Some would have embroidery on them, others would have you know, other stuff like that. The neckline would be different sometimes. Like it was really just like the smaller areas of decoration. It's kind of a little tedious to get into in like just the short little question, but like they would have just little variations from village to village. So
From my experience, okay, the Lemko ones are pretty much that blue like you see in the pictures here, but you get
yeah.
into the more the Lemko region in Slovakia, they'll be black. And you go over trying to think of Carpatho, you see more of the sheepskin,
Oh yeah.
the
Yeah.
leather kind of
Yeah.
vest. Also, John Birosh wants to talk here, so I'm gonna allow him to talk. He had his hand up. Go ahead, John. John,
Can you guys hear me?
yes.
Okay. I just want to tell you the Tiki Poto thing that you saw is not just for tourists. Actually, at almost every wedding around the village, about midnight or so, the group comes in, they dress the bride up complete in the outfit. The
Awesome.
singers come in, they do the bridal dance in full regalia. And then they go through, I think they call it a chepak, whatever, where they sit the bride down.
The Chepekovini, yeah.
Yeah, and they take the veil off of her, the beautiful bridal, the parta. They take the parta off,
Mhm.
and the mother puts the little cap on that now signifies that she is a married woman and not a
Yes.
single woman. And there
Yeah.
are tears galore in the whole place. Everybody is
Oh, yeah.
crying when the mother takes that beautiful parata off and puts that cap on to say you are now. But they do that at almost all the weddings now. The group will go in about midnight or so, and now the regular thing. And then about midnight, the bride comes out and dresses in the croy, and they come out and do the bridal dance and everything else in all the weddings. And it's really a dramatic ceremony in the process. Everybody just loves it over there. But they do that at almost every local wedding. They make them come out and they ask them to come out, and the singers and dancers do the whole thing over there. It's quite impressive.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of people in America who are bringing back the Chepekovani, which is like the placing of the chepets on their head. When I eventually get married, I want to do that. So like, yeah, no, it's really cool that how that's I didn't know that they did that for every local wedding. So that's really cool to hear. Thank you.
When you do that, your wedding, let me know. I'll fly them over from Slovakia to do it for you at the wedding. Okay.
Yes.
All right, John. Okay. Let's see. Oh, I know. I have a question here. How do you research the folk dress from specific villages? How have you been doing your research?
So there's a great blog called folkcostumes.blogspot.org, and they have a whole section on the Rusyns and Lemkos and Zakarpathia. So I've studied that back to back. I also am very close friends with Ellis Island Vintage, which is a Pittsburgh-based company that sources Croy from the old country and brings it here. And he's been like my mentor for about like, I don't know, like 5 years now while I've been doing this research, and he's helped a lot. Also, going over there and learning about the costumes, especially in Slovakia, definitely helps. And I have books too that go over it. So
What was
just a
that
lot of
blog
studying.
spot? I want to put it in the chat here.
I think it's just called folkcostumes.blogspot.com. But I will double check that with you and I can send it to you.
Okay, let me do that. I think I know which one you're talking about because I've seen it too. Actually, hey, Christine Hrchak, do you know what it is? Okay, John, you wanted to talk. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, there's another question in chat that said, did all the men wear hats?
Yes, all of the men would have worn hats. I mean, they would have taken it off and put it back on at certain occasions, but yeah, they all did wear hats.
Oh, there's that other one too. It seems like they did a lot of things for protection. What were they concerned about?
I mean, you know, superstition, evil spirits, stuff like that. Like when you're in transition in the sort of folklore, you're sort of in danger in a lot of ways. Like you are susceptible to being influenced. So like pregnant mothers are in a state of transition, they're not allowed to do certain things. People who are getting married are in a state of transition, also not allowed to do certain things because that could harm the health of the bride or child if they're pregnant, you know, like it's about the sort of transitional phase of life and how that can be, you know, like that's a vulnerable stage for somebody.
Okay, is there any more questions here? Oh, what? Okay.
I don't see any more questions in
Okay, somebody
chat.
put that black spot in there and it's okay, it's costume singular, so you can see it in the chat there. Okay, I gotta see if I have any questions here. More. How do some of the Lemko wedding traditions vary from like Transcarpathia or something? Do you know?
So it's pretty similar, but there are like minor like village variations. This was a very broad sort of version of the wedding. I do know that in some regions in Slovakia, like sometimes if the bride doesn't have any brothers or something like that, the groom will actually move into the bride's house and the process is all reversed. Like there's a lot of variations of it that happen. This is just the one I studied for this presentation, but
You will see some wedding themes in Shadows of a Forgotten
oh yeah,
Ancestor.
that's a
There is
Hutzul
that
wedding.
are
Yeah,
more from
yeah,
that Hutzul area.
yeah.
I believe, isn't it like they wear white aprons when they're still single, but once they get married, it's black aprons?
Yes, that would make sense. Just with the various folk costumes from different regions, like the unmarried woman's dress usually has a white apron. The married one's has a dark, like either an indigo dyed or a black apron.
Hmm. And then there's something about, I know in Transcarpathia, they wear more the woven
Yeah,
waist tie, and I think it's, yeah, I don't know, you tie it in the front or something, and
yeah,
then move it
it's
to
how
the
you
back
tie
when
your
you're married or
belts.
something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, there's variations with that. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see, I'm seeing a couple questions, John, here. I was wondering if how reverence for the land environment shows up in our ancestral wedding ceremonies.
Oh, so that's actually very interesting. I mean, the most obvious one is the bride is and groom are showered with grain, so that has to do with, you know, land fertility. A lot of like the stuff that has to do with fertility has to do with grain. Another thing that I found interesting that I didn't get to put in the presentation, but when in some villages when they do the Chipikovani, the Chepet ceremony, they sit the bride on a pail of water from the local uh river, which is also a fertility thing. So like the land and operating in in sync with the land is very important to fertility of people and crops and all sorts of stuff. Like it's all seen as interconnected.
I know that what they use in the crown for the bride, they use periwinkle a lot. And so periwinkle is something grows like a weed,
Exactly.
essentially. So they are using things in their flowers and in their wedding things
Yes.
that are traditionally grown there.
There's another question. Do they still wear wedding clothing in Slovakia these days?
That would depend on the person. If it's somebody who's very into their heritage, I've seen traditional weddings in Slovakia, but they also do the Western wedding or some combination of the two. Like the bride will wear a white wedding dress for part of the ceremony, then she'll switch into a kroy, and they'll do the chepet ceremony. It depends on the person. Yeah.
There's another one. I've seen wedding pictures where the bride has her feet resting on a pillow. Is that common?
I've actually not seen that. I will have to look into it.
And did certain kinds of jewelry mean certain things?
So jewelry, like there wasn't really like a wedding ring tradition as far as I've learned. I mean, the type of like jewelry was more so like part of the outfit in general. It didn't really have much to do with the wedding. At least not that I'm aware of. So, yeah.
And so
So-
what I've seen on some of your neck jewelry, what I've observed is the Lemkos, you tend to use the red beads or
Oh, the
the big kind of beaded things.
Yeah,
I think
the
you made
crevel,
some. Or
big
did you make the one
crevel.
on your neck? Did you
No,
make
this
that one?
is this
No, I've
was
seen
made
more like that in
by-
Transcarpathia.
Yeah, this is from Transcarpathia. This is by Mihail Lizechko's fiance. He's also on YouTube. She made this for me and gave it to Maria Silvestri to bring to America for me during last year's studium. So it's my good luck, Slidanki.
So one more question. Does the wedding celebration last all day?
It actually lasts up to 3 days sometimes. So like you have the ceremony going on and then you party and drink and eat the next few days.
My parents' wedding went on for 2 days.
Mm-hmm. That sounds about right.
Yeah. Oh, hold on a minute. I think there's one more in Q&A.
No,
No,
there's,
there's not. Okay.
no, that was just a thank you, a fun presentation
Yes.
in there. So is there any more questions? All right, let's see here. Oh, now there is one. I've seen what appears to be group weddings in church books from Slovakia from the 1800s. Is this the case with these? I don't know what he means by group weddings.
So I mean that might have just been an actual wedding in the 1800s in Slovakia, whereas this is more so a reenactment of a wedding in a sort of society where it's like you have the Western wedding, maybe with some Rusyn elements, but you don't do the full thing.
Hey, Bonnie Burke said you can find some Lemko beaded jewelry on the Heritage Store, the Carpatho-Rusyn
Oh, cool.
Society Heritage Store. She said along with the croy Karen is wearing. My croy, no, maybe the croy. I don't know what she's talking about unless she's talking about my sweatshirt.
Yes. Amerykański kroje. American kroje.
Oh, she said Gunnar said several at church at the same time, and you know what that may be is because there's only certain times of the year that you can get married in an
Yes.
Orthodox or Greek Catholic church. So they may have had a lot of weddings at one time to avoid that. I don't know, John. I wonder, John Birosh, if you can maybe answer that. Let me try to get to you and unmute you again.
I
John.
don't know about group weddings, but I know the old pictures I have in the wedding picture, there's probably 30 or 40 people. It's like the whole village is in the wedding picture. There isn't like a wedding party. It's everybody that was there, basically, that's related in any way or shape or form is in the picture. So when you see them, that may be what you're seeing is that sort of thing.
Okay.
And I wanted
And
to, and I
you-
want to tell you that the weddings over there, like when the Tiki Potok area, after the church and everything in the afternoon and whatever, there's a big sit down dinner at 6. There's another big sit down dinner at midnight. There's breakfast at sunrise. And that's the traditional, the wedding. Then you got the Sunday wedding party, the party at their house, and the Friday stuff before that. And yeah, it's a full 3 day.
John, do they send
event.
out wedding invitations, or is it just like anybody in the village can come?
In the within Tiki Potok, the bride's mother and father will personally go to houses, and they will bring a box of cookies and some wine and whatnot and personally invite you to come to the wedding. So they will go to the houses, or they'll have one of the relatives go to the houses and invite the people to the wedding. And that's the way I've seen it done over there. Is it's a personal invitation, like a week before the wedding or so, they'll come to the house with a box of cookies and everything else.
Okay, there's another one here. Were weddings always an early morning on Saturdays?
I don't know.
John, do you know?
Well, what was the question again?
Were weddings always an early morning on Saturdays?
Usually. Sometimes now it's moved to the afternoon, but most of them were usually Saturday morning weddings is what most of them were for some reason or other.
Okay.
I would imagine it gives you more time to drink is what it's all about, so it's more time for Slivovitsa if you go in the afternoon than in the, in morning than afternoons.
All right, thanks. I'm muting you again. In your research, did you find any other residual pagan traditions or beliefs that continued into the Christian wedding ceremony?
Yeah, so I mean the Christian wedding ceremony in the church is a little different. Like the folk wedding is where you see the most pagan elements, I would say. So I mean, like there's plenty of different traditions you could have. Like, I mean, like the dance in the circle, according to Mikola Mushinka, could have been a remnant of I want to keep things PG here, but a thing where the bride would have some fun with other members of the groom's family or the best man. There's also a thing where the best man will sit in the bed with the bride and stuff like that. That doesn't seem too Christian to me, but yeah. And that's because fertility on the male side wasn't really understood in prehistoric times. So like you just had, fertile woman.
Someone said here that some brides still wear red for their undergarments to ward off the evil eye. I've never heard that one, but
I mean, that would make sense. Yeah, like my family is big into warding off the evil eye. They do a ritual to remove it if you're not having a good time or you're having a panic attack or something. So,
okay, was divine liturgy included in the wedding celebration? I'm gonna unmute John here. I think it depends, but let me find him again and unmute him. John?
Yeah, yes, the divine liturgy is always included in it. There's a procession from the bride's house to the church. Everybody meets at the bride's house, including the band. And then the orchestra starts playing as they march through the streets of the village. And everybody comes out of their houses and joins the procession, and they go to the church and have the wedding in the church. And then after that, the parties all start after that.
Yep.
But there's always that procession to the church, and then the official, wedding ceremony.
yeah.
Okay, thanks. All right, I think we're coming on the hour here, and we're getting done here. If you have any other questions, or I don't know, Izzy, do you want to give out your email address, or would you rather have me screen some and send to you, or?
I can, yeah, I'll just send out my email address in the chat.
Okay.
All right. Yep.
All right. Thank you very much. And if you know somebody who would be interested in the presentation, that's a CRS member, you can let them know it was recorded. And I don't know, it might be a couple weeks by the time we get it out. So we do a little teeny bit of editing at like cutting off some of the beginning and things like that. But yes, let's get to the last couple slides here. Okay. All right. So some of the upcoming CRS online educational events. On Thursday, February 20th, Pat Krafchick will discuss her latest book, Witness to Interwar Subcarpathian Rus, The Sojourns of Peter I don't know, I can't pronounce that.
Peter
And Ivan Olbrach. I don't think CRS has that book available. And then Tuesday, April 29th, Bogdan Horbo will discuss the first Lemko businessman in America based on his recently published book. I believe CRS Heritage Store does have that. Oh, Amy, let's see. Okay. Let's see, did you just send that to? Okay, Izzy, I'll do it. You just sent your email just to us.
Oh, oops. Here, I can redo it.
Okay.
No, I see it in the chat. It's above.
Yeah, but it says to hosts and panelists.
I didn't realize I had to change that.
Okay, I saw it in
It should
general
be to
email.
everyone now.
I saw it in the general chat.
It is, but it just says to hosts and
Oh, okay.
let's see, I'll do it
Does
here.
everybody see it now?
I don't know, I'm doing it here.
Okay.
Okay, everybody sees it now. Okay,
Great.
for more information on activities that are coming up with CRS, because there are some things that chapters do too, you go to the CRS website and go under events, and they should show up on the calendar there. Okay, go to the next slide, Izzy. Okay, please consider supporting our mission at the Carpatho-Rusyn Society. For more information or make a contribution, or if you're not a member to join, go to their website, www.c-rs.org. Thanks, everybody. One last question here, and I'll say, did they have lots of pivo and vino? Of course they did, Dennis.
You gotta have the
Brought
supply
ours
that
today.
goes on.
All right, thank you, everybody. I'm going to end the session. Thank you.
Yep,
Lots of
bye-bye.
thank yous.
Everybody. Thank you very much.
All right, bye-bye.
All right.